Whoever has the mic, just go.
Thanks. I'm just kind of curious on your view of what the apparent demise of venture capital in Boulder County or in Rocky Mountains in general. I mean, you think about Centennial, Sequel Ventures, Sequel, Appian, Vista Ventures, all those, they seem to be gone, and there doesn't seem to be an active replacement. I mean, is VC sort of dead in the Rocky Mountain area?
For people that don't have the history here, let me give just a brief piece of history. The question is venture capital dead in this region? And I would say absolutely not. In fact, it's probably more vibrant right now than it ever was when there were lots of venture firms here. Centennial was really the founder of the venture capital community in Colorado. In 1983, two guys, Steve Halstead, Jack Tankersley, started Centennial. And for many, many years, Centennial was the anchor, biggest, best-known investor in Denver and Colorado area. They invested internationally. So they invested in plenty of companies locally, but they invested in lots of companies that were not local. In the 90s, especially the late 90s, as the internet bubble heated up, you had a number of other firms get created. The ones you mentioned, Sequel, for example, got started in 1997. Vista and Appian were both firms that were started, I think, in 2000 or 1999. They were firms that were a small amount of individual capital and then SBIC money. So their funds were not institutional funds in their first fund. There was not a second fund for either firm. And part of the dynamic there was they really didn't have an institutional base that they were building on. You had other firms that got created around here. Jack started a firm called Meritage. I moved here in 1995, and then co-founded Mobius, which was a West Coast fund, but we invested here. There were a number of other people who were investing here. Access Venture Partners got started, and they had a small seed fund, and a few others. What happened sort of post-internet bubble, not just in Colorado, but around the world, was a massive contraction in the number of venture capital funds. I think at the peak, there were a couple of thousand VC funds, maybe as many as 3,000. And by 2005, the number of active VC funds was well under 500. And the measure is not whether they had a website, but whether they made any new investments that year. Because a VC firm has to raise money roughly every 5 years to effectively stay in business to raise a new fund. This proliferation of venture funds across the country contracted very dramatically, but it didn't vanish. We raised our first Foundry Group fund in 2007, $225 million fund. One other fund that's been around for a long time in Boulder is Boulder Ventures, which is still very active. I think they have a $60 or $70 million fund. But we raised our first fund in 2007. Techstars focused on the seed stage activity. There were a large number of angel investors that were successful entrepreneurs that started investing at the beginning of these companies. As these companies became a little more mature, still young companies, 10, 20, 30 employees, but with product in revenue, you started seeing investors from all over the US invest, even at an early stage level. So Bay Area firms like Softtech VC or First Round Capital would come to Boulder and invest in Boulder-based companies. Later stage companies, you saw lots of investment from firms all around the country. The dynamics of a local VC ecosystem is one that is misunderstood commonly. And I talk about it a little bit in startup communities. I blog about it plenty. There's this view that you have to have a lot of local venture capital firms to have a successful startup community and innovation economy. That turns out to be wrong. And it turns out to be a misplaced effort by a lot of government. You need a lot of seed capital. You need a lot of entities that can write checks at $1 million to $2 million level, which could be $25,000 or $50,000 checks from angel investors or small seed investors or $100,000 investors. That market dynamic in Colorado right now is incredibly vibrant. And it's vibrant for lots of different reasons. The next layer is the later stage funding. When your company has raised now $20 million and is looking for the next $20 or $50 million, that capital's easy because that capital will move. That's very migratory based on success. If I'm a New York-based investor, I don't care where you're based, or if I'm a Bay Area investor that invested at that stage, or if I'm a Boston-based, I don't care where you're based because I'm a late-stage investor. It's that middle layer that's really hard, the post-seed, but before you've really had success. And there's two dynamics there that are super important to understand. Number one, the supply-demand imbalance for that is messed up everywhere. There's way more demand than there is supply, even in the Bay Area. Now, the magnitude's much bigger, but there's a lot more companies competing for that magnitude. The second is, even though people talk about, oh, it feels like it's easy to raise money right now, it ain't. It's always hard to raise money, especially in good markets. What happens is that most of the money moves to companies that have clear momentum. And if you can't demonstrate clear momentum at that level, it's hard. So the seed layer is easy. The late stage layer is easy. I say easy on a relative basis. The middle layer is a bitch no matter where you are. And again, that linkage that you have to have VCs locally driving it, it's false premise. And what you saw sort of coming out of the demise of firms, or firms that go away, not just here, but you list Vista and Appian, I could give you a list of hundreds, on the East Coast, the West Coast that I know, and there's many more. The reason they went away is that their performance wasn't very good in the time period where they needed to raise more money. Ironically, some of those funds have performed just fine over a 10 or 15-year period, but in that 5-year period where they really needed to go raise the next round, they didn't have any capital demand. Let's keep moving so we have a few more. I don't know where the mic is. You've got the mic. Do one in the back. I know there's one here, but let's do one or two in the back so that the back doesn't get neglected. Just because you all came in late. You optimized well.
Hi. So given that this is a lot of folks from federal labs as well as our industry partners here today, the question I have for you is really, from your view as an investor, does engagement with a federal laboratory or with the federal government help or hurt for a small business? And then sort of like, what can we do to make that better, or is there something we can do to not hurt so much?
So I think it helps a lot. I mean, I actually think federal labs, ironically, have a cleaner view of the world than university research and technology transfer. I have and I'll just make a pet peeve comment of mine. I was at MIT as a student when MIT Technology Transfer organization got created, and there's really two kinds of technology transfer ends of the spectrum. There's heavy and there's light touch. And Stanford is a good example of light touch. MIT's moved towards light touch, but there's a lot like CU Boulder that I would say are heavy touch, which basically means light touch means we're going to give you the technology. We're going to help you with whatever we can do. We'd like a little tiny piece of something, but we'll make it really easy for you. And if it doesn't work, that's life. And if it does work, when you become billionaires, you'll write us a big check. And one of the canonical examples, it's not the original, but this generation's canonical example of that is Google. But you have many, many, many examples of that from MIT and Stanford. Akamai would be an MIT example of it, where that cycle really worked very powerfully. However, you have the heavyweight model, which is we will give you this technology. Here's all the strings that are attached that you have to do to be able to keep the rights to the technology. And here's how much we want from you in terms of ownership of your tiny little company that today is worthless. And here's the other things we want you to do for us. And it essentially squelches many of those companies' ability to perform. And when one of them does, everybody says, look at how great that was. But the problem is there's a whole bunch of other things that could be great that never get to great. That's a university model problem. My experience in a few cases with technology transfer in government and research labs in government is it's in the middle of those two things. And the thing that is the harder part for government is the regulatory dynamic and all of the sort of rule environment that you have to conform to and reporting dynamics around that. But for companies that are focused on that and get good at that, that's just overhead. That's not overhead that suppresses them, that's just overhead that they have to engage with. And what we've said, and again, I think kind of the In-Q-Tel experience is one that is a great one for people to look at and learn from. What they really did was they tried to focus on being a connector of these technologies within other places in federal government, especially when they were somehow linked into the technology development, because you know how to navigate within government, whether you're running a federal lab or in a federal lab, you know how to navigate that a lot better than the startup, so helping them get connected in appropriately is powerful. The reason I think it's a cleaner model is that the incentive dynamics are pretty clear. Public university for example, CU Boulder likes to talk about being a public university. It's 95% funded by private interests. It's only 5% funded by the state of Colorado at this point, or 6% or something like that. So really, it's looking for ways to generate money for itself. And the technology transfer dynamic that's the mission, that's the focus. Remember this notion of hierarchical norms? So if I'm running the TTO, I look at how do I make money for the university versus how do I get this stuff out there into the world. I think the government government agencies and federal labs tend to have a cleaner view of that over time, and it was really in the 1950s and 1960s and even the 1970s, massive enablers of huge industry because the focus was much more on getting that technology out into commercialization. I mean, how many people here don't use the internet? Does anybody not use the internet? The same people that don't use Facebook, I guess, probably. I think Facebook would like to think that. I mean, we wouldn't have the internet without DARPA and federal research funding and the way that worked. And by the way, with university involvement in that. So the basis for many of the industries that today are the fastest moving industries, when you look back 40 or 50 years, are a function of what I would say is proactive, lightweight, constructive government engagement to try to facilitate and then expand the use of technology. If you think about 2015, the interesting thing is not 2016. The interesting thing is 2025. So investors who are focused on doing things with government labs that are focused on 2025, and entrepreneurs, I should say, more than investors, I think those are incredibly powerful arcs. If you're focused on how do I optimize this for 2016, I think you're going to miss. One more in the back and then come up front and do the last couple up here. We'll get you and you. You're in my line of sight.
Can you give us an example, either a hypothetical or a real-world example you've seen of a situation where, you know, from a hierarchical organization standpoint, where they, you know, handled it from that viewpoint, but then where, you know, it would have been handled a different way from the standpoint as a node in the network?
Yeah. I told this example earlier. I'll use it again because I think it's a really powerful one, and it's very contemporary. How many people are familiar? How many people are not familiar with the movie Star Wars? How many people are not aware that there's a new Star Wars movie coming out this fall? How many people are as happy as I am? How many people know that there's a new robot in that movie? Okay, so we know C-3PO and R2-D2. We've seen the trailer now, or if you haven't seen the trailer, go look at the trailer. You'll see a new robot that's a ball. Ball is its main body that sort of scurries across on the trailer. And there was recently, J.J. Abrams did a big thing about this new robot called BB-8, talked about it. There is the Disney Accelerator that I was talking about earlier is in LA. And of the 50 mentors, about 15 of the mentors are Disney executives, including Bob Iger and others. One of the companies that went through, they had about 10 companies. I think they had a dozen. We let it, the 10 we use as an approximate 10, so sometimes it's 11 or 12. One of those companies was a company in Boulder called Orbotics. Their product is called Sphero. Anybody have a Sphero? Oh, cool. Do you like it? It's okay. I think it's awesome. It's a ball that you control with your smartphone, robotic ball. And you say, well, what's the big deal about that? It's a robotic ball you control with your smartphone, and it's so cool. Their second product is a product called Allie, which is Sphero's crazy cousin. He's like a tube with wheels on the end. Same kind of thing, though. And it's a robot, but you know, a huge amount of the fun utility is the software that they continually develop on the iPhone or Android that you use not just to control the robot, but do different kinds of games with it. So they're a good-sized company. They're a 50, 60-person company here in Boulder. They've sold about almost, I think, 400,000 robots. Maybe they're pushing 500,000 robots at this point. The robots are, you know, $129. Ollie's $99. Inexpensive. They decided to go through the Disney Accelerator because they were trying to figure out their third product. And the two co-founders were really the product innovators, so they could spend full time going and working on the new product because the rest of the business was running. The CEO, Paul, decided to go spend half of his time in the Disney Accelerator. And Disney Accelerator is in Burbank, across the street from, Glendale, I'm sorry, across the street from the Imagination headquarters things that Disney has. Big part of Disney's infrastructure. And they went and they did this 90-day program. This is the first Disney Accelerator. Bob Iger was Paul's mentor. So he spent 30 minutes with Paul every other week. And, a couple weeks into the program, he said to Paul, hey, what you guys are doing is really cool. Do you think you could make this? And he brought up a little picture on his iPhone and he showed it to Paul. It's a picture of BB-8. And it was just like a hand-drawn picture. And Adam and Ian, the other two guys, saw it. And then he says, I can't give this to you, but can you do that? And so Adam and Ian rushed back to their desks and scribbled what they'd saw on the picture on a piece of paper so they'd remember it. And then stayed up all night and took a Sphero and hacked together what they thought they saw. And they showed a video of that moving. It was pretty crude, but a video of that moving Paul sent to Iger the next day. And he said, this is awesome. This is what we should do. And that resulted in, a complex negotiation, but where Orbotics ended up being one of the very small number of companies. The other one is a very large company that are coming out with BB-8 robots around the launch of the film. And by the way, it's an incredibly hard technical problem. Makes the robotic ball technical problem look even harder because now you have a robotic ball and you have a thing on top of the robotic ball and you have to keep those things in sync while you do stuff. That's an example. I could give you, 20, 30, 40 more of those from just the last couple of years of Techstars that would have never, ever, ever happened without that kind of engagement model. There would have been no way that Paul would have ever had that moment with Bob Iger that was the spark of creativity. There would have been no connection between the two people that was a result of that then caused the organization, which, by the way, there was an awful lot of this going on after that video got sent around. Right? There was a lot of, I remember walking back and forth on my cell phone with Paul in a hotel room or during a talk, not like this, but like in that hall in a hotel with him just like, this is so hard. I can't believe how hard getting this deal is done. I feel like there's no way we're going to get something done here. I'm like, take a deep breath, right? Think about a beach. Relax. All right, what are the real issues, right? And eventually they get through them. And that getting through the real issues was also the fact that on the Disney side, not just the CEO, but a number of people within the senior ranks of Disney, there's a deal person, but then there were other people who are like, we got to figure out how to do this. This is really important to us. We understand that we've got to make a deal that has to work for both companies, which in the absence of those relationships, it would have been, okay, well, we got this tiny little company, and it's really great for them that we're giving them the chance to do this. And they should just be so, so happy that we, the big company, are giving them the chance to do this. Notwithstanding that this little tiny company is doing some technological innovation that they have no prayer of ever doing. Right? So it has to be this sort of both sides view it as an advantageous relationship. All right, you want to bring the mic up here? We've got one here and there's one here. One more. Okay, we'll do. Was yours a good question? All right, send me an email, brad@feld.com. But before we end on this one, brad@feld.com is my email address. I'm happy to respond to anything that we didn't get to. If there's a way that you want to connect me into your world or connect into my world, again, it's a network, feel free to send me a note. My only request is, imagine somebody who gets 500 emails a day and tries to respond to all of them, so start with the punchline. Just remind me of context, but start with the punchline so I can do something with it, whether it's connect you to somebody in my world or give you a reaction to something. But if there's anything useful, don't be bashful. Last question.
I have a question regarding how you increase the probability of survival of your small startups. SBA statistics show that only half of the small businesses are alive after 4 years. So how patient is your capital firm? When do you want a startup to break even or bring you a profit?
This is awesome because we're going to get to do your question too. It's random and chaotic. There's no set of rules that you can do to increase the probability other than work hard. Seriously, like, if you have to accept that 50% of things that are new startups and innovative companies are going to fail. Maybe you can increase that to 51%. Doesn't matter. That's not the focus. There are an enormous list of things you can do to increase the kind of success a company has. But if you're trying to increase the percentage of success across the entire dynamic, I don't think that'll work. So it's a much longer answer of what are things, you know, the question you're asking below the question is what are things we can do to help them be successful? That's the question I'd ask, and I would say that in our experience as investors, it's very company specific. It's founder specific, it's technology specific, it's market specific. It changes over time based on what the innovation vector is in the competitive landscape. If you're in an industry like the ones I live in, where there's, you know, software, the innovation cycle is so unbelievably rapid that patents don't really matter, and actually a huge hindrance because people who buy patents that don't actually make anything try to slow down the innovation, right? It's not like if you do this, 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 and this, life gets better. It's how can we help this individual company? And for me, so much of it is getting and figuring out how to help that entrepreneur, how to help that CEO with what he or she really needs. Can we do the one last one? I feel guilty. All right.